here. Oh shoot, let me turn off my stupid
Let's see
phone.
if we're live. We should be live now. Yes, we are. Okay. Good evening, everyone. This is Danny Haifong. We are with you for another edition of Left Lens Live. Today, it will just be, but not just be, Margaret, Kimberly, and I, two co-hosts of the program. It's been a while. We had a crazy April, very busy April. Breaks and all kinds of work that we're involved with. So, good evening, everyone. We are back, and April is almost over, and there's so much to talk about. So, let's get right into it.
Yeah.
First, I think we need to really discuss all of the reactions and the discussion and debate around both the conviction of Derek Chauvin for the murder of George Floyd, the officer that killed George Floyd. And then, I mean, there were 6 people killed by police, I believe it was, around the same time that this verdict, I think the very same day that the verdict dropped, 6 people in the United States were killed, disproportionate number of them black, including who we will talk a lot about, I think, Ma'Khia Bryant, a young woman of color, young black woman, killed in Ohio by police. And there has been a lot of confusion around this. So I thought we would come together tonight, Margaret and I, to discuss this. So yeah, Margaret, how are you doing? And let's just jump right in. First, I think the first uh, the first thing that really, I think, angers me about reactions to all that is going on around Derek Chauvin and the conviction for George Floyd's murder, and then the Ma'Khia Bryant murder by Ohio police, is just how quick a lot of people are, even people on the left are, to protect the police and to also find solace in this ruling. I mean, I think that, of course, we should understand that if it wasn't for the millions upon millions of people who protested damn near all summer last year, this ruling would not have come about. Derek Chauvin would not have been convicted because nearly 100% of police officers are exonerated for their murders of people, which, as you say over and over and over again, I've heard you in program after program, appearance after appearance, article after article, 1,000 people per year the police kill, and nearly 99.9% of those cops, they get off and they walk free, and many of them keep their jobs. So yeah, I mean, let's just jump right in. The Ma'Khia Bryant murder in particular, I think there's been a lot of just, I think, unhelpful, downright racist debate
Yes.
about the character of the killing and how somehow her murder was justified because they say the media and, from how people are measuring and interpreting the film footage, which we have footage, almost all the time now of these murders, that because she was wielding a knife, that means she deserved to die. Essentially, the cop did the only thing he could do, which was to kill her. So yeah, Mario, what are your thoughts about all these events and anything else that you want to talk about? Because I know it's been a while and it's been a long, long, hot April.
Excuse me. I'm sorry I'm fiddling with stuff. I'm trying to also tell people to watch us at the same time.
No, that's all right.
It's the thing I always point out about Derek Chauvin, about the fact that he was even arrested immediately after George Floyd's murder came to light, that the video was shown and seen by millions of people. It's clear that officials in Minneapolis were thought that they could treat this the way they usually do. They could say, "Well, we're going to suspend him," or something, and then the protest started immediately, and they said, "Well, we're firing them. We're firing him and the other cops who didn't stop him." Um, but he was not arrested until someone set fire to the a police station in Minneapolis. I am convinced that had that not happened, they would have treated this case the way they treat every other case of police murder, and done everything they could not to have him charged, not to arrest him. The district attorney, the one who messed up Philando Castile's murder, and the cop got off. I don't know. Actually, I shouldn't say he messed it up. He probably didn't want to get a conviction in the first place. The first thing he said was, well, this could have possibly been justified. Well, when someone set fire to the police station, that changed everything. And it's a difficult thing to talk about. I don't want to, there are people who protested who are still in jail. So I don't want to give the impression that this is something that people ought to do without thinking about the consequences. But that's why they arrested him. They can handle peaceful, they don't care about peaceful protest. But when it was taken directly to them, when, we're always told protests shouldn't be violent. Well, I believe that's why they arrested him. I don't believe it's a coincidence that he was arrested the day after. And of course, everyone's been following this case, and there's so many disappointments and so much anger about these murders it's not the first murder that police killing that was filmed, but the cop got off. So people were never sure what was going to happen, but it was clear the state they were going to sacrifice Derek Chauvin if they didn't sacrifice anybody else. And they did everything in their power, putting together a case the way they always should to get a conviction. But people have been following this case so closely and have such intense feelings about it. As soon as the deliberation, first of all, there was a lot of comment during the trial, which lasted for 4 weeks. I'm not sure how a murder on video the trial can take 4 weeks, but it did. So as soon as the jury went out, would he be guilty, would he be not? All of the guesswork. I had once heard that if a jury comes back fast, they acquit. So it didn't bother me that I think it took almost 2 days of deliberation. But anyway, the judge announced that the jury had reached a verdict, and immediately on social media, texts, phone calls, the jury has come back. And about the same time, this young teenager, 16-year-old Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio, was killed by the police. And it really saddened me that there are many people defending the cop. Well, she did have a knife. Well, she could have stabbed the other girl. Well, I thought the police were supposed to prevent murders. But Americans are very much indoctrinated, and people have to be careful. That indoctrination can come up even if you think you're woke, even if you're a Black person condemning police murder. Any excuse, anything can have the effect of people falling back into this brainwashing we have, that might makes right, that the state is right, that you deserve to be executed if you do anything wrong. And it's ironic, in the week leading up to the verdict, another young 20-year-old Dante Wright also near Minneapolis was killed by police. He was pulled over for having air freshener on his rear view mirror. I had no idea that was illegal anywhere, but it's just an excuse to stop Black people, that's all. And he was killed. And a 13-year-old in Chicago, another kid, Adam Toledo, was killed several weeks earlier, but the video was made public at around the same time. So it's almost like there were some people who are like, well, I'm angry enough. I want one case where I'm not going to be mad at the cops, and I don't have to go through any cognitive dissonance of living in this country. But Ma'Khia Bryant was a foster child, living in a situation where she was being bullied. The first report said she had called the police. Actually, her sister had, because I'd been attacked by another group of girls and actually some grown women. I don't watch these videos because they're snuff films, and
Me
they just
either. Yeah, I
so
don't
I have
either.
not
Yeah.
watched it. So I'm depending on the descriptions of other people. Um, that the cop just drove up and started shooting. And we need to always condemn the police unless somebody is. I'm trying to think of what circumstances I would possibly defend a police shooting. Maybe if, the person was in the act of murdering someone else. It's never anything like the movies. It's never anything like we're told. Actually, nothing the police do is anything like we're told. Um, and she called for help, and it's not the first time that someone, or rather her sister, called for help and ended up dead. uh, I don't know what I would have to witness in order to call the police under any circumstance. So here we are with the verdict, with the fact that a trial took place at all, because protests became violent. And I think we have to own that and talk about that, and not be quick to be so proud of non-violent protest when it was violent protest that got us to this situation. And then, of course, people, the case had become symbolic of so much. It wasn't just, I don't think, just the burning of the police precinct, but the fact that the protest was huge. It was millions of people. It was many white people. It was, polls showed that most white people, for the first time ever, had a positive opinion about Black protest. And this was very unsettling to the system. And so, we have politicians, Nancy Pelosi and members of Congress taking a knee, plus wearing kente cloth. Um, and everyone was poised to say that everything's okay now. We're back to, this normal that people should not be comfortable with. See, everything does work. The country does have justice. And I want to make it clear, I'm not complaining that Chauvin was found guilty. I'm glad he was found guilty, but they're not going to repeat what they did in his case to get other cops convicted. And this idea of 6 people in one day, I mean, on average, it's 3 people a day. And most of the names we don't know, we never hear about. So that's where we are now, with a small victory. And it is a small victory, but a systemic injustice that continues. The police still acting like a slave patrol, people still being confused about what they can do to change the system and try to prevent these things from happening. So it's a lot. It's a complicated and confusing time.
Well, there's a lot to this time too. First, you mentioned Nancy Pelosi's name, and the only thing I could think about was her horrific statement
Oh, I
after the
forgot that.
verdict.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, I mean, how can we forget? I mean, I immediately reacted to it as she sounded like, and I know, I don't want to get into Nancy Pelosi's head because
No,
certainly there are a lot of demons there, but what it sounded like was a very strangely worded statement that
mhm.
the only thing I could think of as she was speaking, thanking George Floyd for dying and crying out to his mother, it sounded like a twisted white woman's lynching fantasy. That's all I could think about. That's like literally all I could think about, even though we can't as I say that's what she was doing. I mean, she definitely has some cognitive issues. She's an older person, but she's also just such she's such a soldier for
Oh,
capital and for the establishment and for this state that it's no surprise that she would be that arrogant and have that kind of hubris in front of the major Black representatives in the United States. Speaking of which, when I you know when I think about Ma'Khia Bryant's death too, and how she was killed in the debate around it, and how so many were willing to debate, even to have this debate, rubbed me the wrong way about
Yeah.
how she was killed and why she was killed. It really rubbed me the wrong way because in 2018, the Congressional Black Caucus, they signed off on the Protect and Serve Act, which basically made it a federal hate crime to harm a police officer, right? Based on motivations to harm police officers. And it was the Blue Lives Matter law and uh, majorities, over 60, I think it was over 2/3 of the Congressional Black Caucus voted in favor of that. So how fitting it is that a young, she was 16, I believe, a Black girl brutally murdered in her own community by this occupying police force uh, is now having her death be debated. But this is so common, right? This happens over and over and over again,
Yeah.
right? What happened in 2014 when Michael Brown's uh, murder sparked, the initial wave of Black Lives Matter protests? That was all the media could talk about, was what was he doing and who was he and
Yeah. Yeah.
how did he look, and he was so big and he's threatening, and this is just a continuous pattern of criminalization of racism, and so many go along with it. A lot of people go along with it, and people want to find, I think, in the United States, because they're so scared of cops. I mean, we have to be honest. Even on the left, people are scared of the police. I mean, they are the armed occupying force of the state. They're the ones who enforce the rule of capital. They're the ones who enforce the rule of the rich. So I think that kind of fear, it's so easy when it's so omnipresent. It's so
Mhm.
easy for even those who claim Black Lives Matter to then say, wait a minute, we need to be very careful about Ma'Khia Bryant. But I don't, when we have just case after case after case, even having the debate seems just incorrect. Anyone with any principles having that debate seems incorrect. It just seems incorrect because,
Yeah.
I mean, we didn't even mention Andrew Brown, who I guess there was police. He was killed earlier in April, and the video that was released shows that he was shot in the back of the head in his own car, holding onto the steering wheel. It's just, this is the kind of lynch mob terror that police departments across the country are engaged in, and it seems like that should be the primary point of conversation, in my opinion. I don't think we should be talking about the merits of death, these kind of so-called life or death situations for the police, when their job honestly isn't that hard anyway. But anyway, I'll
No,
let you go, Margaret.
no, it's not. It's like, we hear whenever people want to defend them, they'll say, well, police work is dangerous. It isn't. Construction work is more dangerous. I mean, there's like a whole list of occupations that are more deadly than police work. Their work is easy. Basically, they use any excuse to round up Black people in particular, walking while Black, driving while Black, riding a bike while Black. Anything, and any white person can act as a member of the slave patrol and call the police on Black people, which, as we've discussed, puts life at risk. So I think, the idea that there are people who don't realize that you don't defend them. But you're right about the fear. People are afraid of the police, and try to think of ways to minimize the risk to their lives. I won't buy a nice car to, to I won't get their attention. I won't go to that part of town. I'll dress this way instead of that way. All kinds of things, which, and there are people who, none of that helps them. So, and also this idea that people accept that they have the right to be, executioners for anything. Well, he shouldn't have resisted. He shouldn't have said this or shouldn't have done that. Um, no, no, and it's really sickening that people can defend in any way. As for Nancy Pelosi, I mean, what a show. She said, she thanked him for giving his life. Oh, wasn't it sad? He cried out for his mother. She is an evil person. She
Yeah.
is. And that's why she's the House Speaker. They wouldn't have a normal halfway decent human being in that job. Her job is to Nancy Pelosi's job is to raise a lot of money And she's rich. It's the easiest thing in the world for rich people to raise money. She and her husband are worth $100 million, is to raise money and make sure that nothing even seemingly progressive gets passed in Congress. So she raises money and beats up on progressives. That's her job. And she carries that out very well. So she couldn't even pretend to have empathy. She couldn't even pretend to have compassion. She didn't even know how to go through the motions. And the members of Congress surrounding her at the press conference, nobody gave her a dirty look. Nobody said anything. I mean, it was a metaphor for how this country is governed. Even people who call themselves progressive, they're all in some caucus. There's a progressive caucus, there's
Right,
just
the progressive. Right.
Democrats, there's a Congressional Black Caucus, and it means nothing because Nancy Pelosi and Joe Biden and all these horrible people, they're the ones that end up ruling the day. And they all came out talking about how justice was done. Joe and Kamala and whoever the hell else, all kinds of people I hate, using this case to defend the system, but it isn't going to stop. The police killings aren't going to stop unless we do something different.
Exactly. I mean, it seems like the only time that the murders of police officers, even the murders of people by police, somewhat scale back is when people are out on the streets constantly about it. I mean, I think we saw that development a little bit 2015-ish, and then again in 2020 this summer we saw that the only time it even received attention, right, was when people were out on the streets, and it was only because of the uprisings, the two different ones over the last 7 or so years, that this is even a conversation. And still, it's a very narrow conversation, to be honest. I mean, so many aspects of the mass Black incarceration state, as we call it, tend to just not be talked about at all, and tend not to be even on the agenda of anybody, including Bernie Sanders' good friend, Joe Biden. Like that's, I think, one of the troubling things. And then with Nancy Pelosi, Mama Bear, I didn't hear anyone from the Squad or the Progressive Caucus or the Congressional Black Caucus take any issue with her statement after the George Floyd verdict.
It was disgraceful what she said. Nobody said anything, and they all used the same platitudes. They're great on Twitter. They're all tweeting, "This should stop. We must do something." They haven't done it.
Right. Exactly.
And now they will pass a Blue Lives Matter law, support militarizing the police, pass Blue Lives Matter legislation. So, and all the scoundrels came out of the woodwork. Al Sharpton and this, ambulance chaser Ben Crump, who, masquerades as someone who can get justice. He can get people money. He must be a good trial lawyer, good at suing, but that's nothing for us to be satisfied with. We're the ones who actually pay for these lawsuits when people get money when their loved ones are killed. It's public money. So that's certainly not justice either. So I think when these crises occur, it brings out everything, and it shows you what's wrong. And the racists come out of the woodwork, and the self-haters come out of the woodwork, and the scoundrels come out of the woodwork, and we forget about what really has to happen. There should be mass actions when anyone is killed by the police. Immediately. It should be immediate. I think that would stop it. But we're living these very atomized lives, and it's rare when people come together. And the president has a lot of power. Whenever there's anything that could help the people, we're always told how little a president can do. And the federal government has the ability to prosecute these cops if the local officials don't. And in his now famous meeting with people who were described as civil rights leaders, he was asked about that. He was asked about what his Justice Department would do. He was asked if they don't even keep track of how many people are killed by police. It's people.
Exactly. I was going to say that if you didn't. Yep.
And he got very angry, and about people talking back to him, and if you don't believe me, to hell with you, or something. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he has a Justice Department. There is an Attorney General. What is he going to do? He has power. He has the power to do something about that. And but we're being snowed all the time about how wonderful he is. He's transformational, and AOC said he exceeded expectations.
Exceeded
Whose
expectations,
whose
indeed.
expectation? Not mine or anybody who claims to be a progressive like she does.
Yeah, I mean that comment is ridiculous.
Mhm.
But to go back to your point about the DOJ too, not only do they not take data, does the Department of Justice not keep data about police murders? I mean, we have like newspapers doing that now. Before it
Yes,
was just like the Malcolm X grassroots movement. I kind of credit
right,
them for first counting, doing the hard grassroots
right.
movement work of looking through local media, etc., and finding out uh, the numbers exactly, how often this kind of thing occurs. And then, the Washington Post and the Guardian, I think, they started to do it. But the DOJ not only doesn't do this, not only doesn't do this, what I think is a critical task in actually addressing this problem, but after George Floyd's verdict, Joe Biden's administration did this really, I think, insulting uh, thing where it declared that the DOJ would investigate the Minneapolis Police Department. Right? It's like these very token measures that only address one single aspect or issue or development, while the fact that going back to the 1960s when the federal government first passed the law, Enforcement Assistance Act, and started to really militarize police departments, and everyone in Congress supports the 1033 program, and
Mhm.
uh, there isn't any, just like a lot of problems, there isn't any real national response to this. There isn't a federalized response to this, and I think that really tells you what this, how the state works. That it isn't this kind of disjointed, uh, you know, checks and balances, local, state, federal kind of thing that operates differently. It actually, there is a unified purpose of this state, and that is to maintain what is going on, which is really the wanton murder of masses of people each year by police, this violent repression, this militarized repression, which is targeted, really. And not a lot of people talk about it like this, but it is targeted at the Black community, in the Black community. It is an occupation. There's a reason why nearly a quarter of all police murders are Black people. And it's because the police departments, as you said, they have roots as slave patrols, and they have not given up their principal purpose, which is to ensure that this racist, settler, colonial, and imperialist order reproduces itself, and that there isn't an interruption. And I feel like a lot of this attempt to try to get us to breathe a sigh of relief. I know that Ajimo Baraka had a good article, I think it was either last week or the week
Mhm.
before, talking about the possibility of Dante Wright kind of hurting the possibility of this sigh of relief from
Yep.
happening. But the verdict itself, immediately, the entire establishment, from the media to every single politician you can, that wasn't Josh Hawley, they were all trying to say that this is justice, right? That this is an example of the system working. And that's a very dangerous thing, because I think a lot of
Yes.
people want to believe that because nothing else is working. We just talked about Nancy Pelosi and the Congress and all that. Everything is crumbling. I mean, the crisis of the economic system, the crisis of the imperialist system around the world, in this political crisis where both parties are seen as illegitimate actors of people that rule this society. I mean, I think all of that, just like it played a part in sparking the massive protests of last summer, it plays a huge part in why there was this huge campaign, like a PR campaign, to get people to talk about how justice had been served rather than talking about, well, this is not only is this one case out of hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds in the last several years alone, but literally 6 people were killed the same day by police, and now everyone's talking about Ma'Khia Bryant. So before, I'll let you react to that, and then we can move on. But yeah,
Sure. It's yeah, you're right. And you said something interesting about uh, the fact that policing is so huge in this country. I've seen this statistic since the verdict that the amount of money spent on policing in this country is bigger than the military budgets of most nations in the world. Russia's
yeah,
military budget is smaller than all the police budgets in this
right.
country.
I think it's the third largest police
Yes,
military
yes.
budget in the world. Yeah.
And we have a society where there are more people who are hired to police other people. It's cops, it's private security, it's mass incarceration, which is a sure sign of a failed state, and that is the way we have to talk about it. And John Mubaraka is correct. They were hoping people would focus solely on this case and be happy with this. I think he called it a show trial. I
Mhm.
frankly was confident that Chauvin was going to be convicted. That may have been wishful thinking on my part, but I just had a feeling. I said, this is one guy. They've decided, oh, no, 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 you're not getting away with this. Sorry, you ruined the brand. You got to go. But uh, so yeah, and in order to do that, there had to be no attention on any other case. But the cops are going to cop, and so they killed Adam Toledo and they killed Dante Wright. And there are these other cases that are coming to light from recent weeks, and Ma'Khia Bryant being killed the same day as the verdict. So try as they might, they cannot disappear this issue because policing does not change.
Yeah.
Supposed to.
Yeah. And another point to the whole, I think the Biden administration is kind of like this political man. We talked about it in prior episodes about how a lot of people were breathing a sigh of relief when Biden was elected. And I think the
Mhm.
Chauvin case, the conviction was kind of like a similar thing. It was a sigh of relief. But just as the Chauvin case, the Chauvin conviction cannot reverse and does not reverse the fact that this is happening
Mhm.
nearly every day in the United States, and much of the time it's happening to Black people. But also Joe Biden, his administration already has given more billions of dollars to police departments worth of military technology and weaponry than Donald Trump did in his 4 years already. I mean, this is just the first quarter, and it's and
Already
I think that's
more Haitians, for as to mention just one more,
exactly.
have been
Yep,
deported since January 20th. Then were deported in all of Trump's administration.
exactly.
It's
Mhm.
but there is this desire to get things right, and when part of the trauma of Trump being president is that people have lowered their already low expectations. Well, thank God Trump is gone. So that's an answer to anything and everything. At least it's not Trump. So Biden could start World War III and deport
Right.
people and let cops off the hook simultaneously. And most people wouldn't say anything because not Trump. Um, and so here we are with this desire, and it's sad that there's this acceptance of so many horrible things if somebody just puts a nice veneer on it. So everything's okay because Biden is president, even though the police are doing what they've always done and the system responds the way it always does,
Right.
because it's Biden and Harris. Biden Harris is, the first. I can't recall. Talk about PR, man. That's some serious propaganda. I can't recall a vice president of an administration being called by both names. But anyway, but that. Excuse me.
No, Obama Biden definitely was not a thing before Joe Biden
Uh-uh.
started running for president in this last cycle, because Barack Obama did not want to be associated with Joe Biden during his administration. That was
No.
100%
Yeah, it's so cynical.
true.
The fact that he became vice president in the first place, that they wanted to pick this right winger who, had bragged about the crime bill that put thousands of black people in jail, who was the point person against busing, who said, I don't want the country's going to be a racial jungle. I don't want my kids in a racial jungle. And the guy who told the corn pop story, and we're supposed to be so happy that he's the one.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I wanted to talk about something too that I thought is worthy of attention in this moment, which is, after Ma'Khia Bryant was killed, superstar, top NBA player in the world, maybe in history, LeBron James, went to Twitter and posted the picture of the cop that killed Ma'Khia Bryant and tweeted in all caps, "You're next." Immediately after that, he got so much pushback. I mean, the Fraternal Order of the Police was hounding him on Twitter. The so-called liberal corporate sports media were hounding him, and the far right sports media, which also exists and is a thing. So you had this kind of universal. Everyone was demanding that LeBron James apologize. He eventually deleted the tweet, and I found it interesting because it gets back to what we were talking about. And somebody just posted in the chat about this: who deserves to die and who doesn't. And I think first, people need to give Black Agenda Report a lot of credit for being right about the Democrats being the more effective evil. That I don't think. Not only do I don't think that this verdict. I think Joe Biden's administration had a lot to do with this verdict as well. It's a very, his administration just started. And if he was not convicted, we would have maybe had a Black Lives Matter, summer Memorial Day situation, riots and rebellions across cities around the country. But I do think that even though LeBron James in the past has made some monumental errors, we were talking before this about Tamir Rice, you mentioned him not pleading the fifth, saying he didn't know anything about it, can't make a comment on 12-year-old Tamir Rice getting shot down in the street by police in his home city where he grew up. But obviously in this moment where more and more people are engaged in this conversation, there's much more pressure. The whole NBA has been, in the WNBA especially, leading the way, but the NBA also has a lot of public relations, a lot of response. It's a 75% Black sport, so there's a lot of focus on the NBA responding to this. And when he responded in the way that he did on Twitter, it wasn't the right response. It kind of reminded me in 2019 when he refused to get on board with the Hong Kong protests, when Daryl Morey came out and said "Free Hong Kong," and he was asked about it. LeBron James was like, "Well, I think he needs to educate himself a little more." That was considered just anathema. You have to come down on China. AOC is doing it. She's pairing up with Ted Cruz, and she's condemning the NBA for its business dealings in China. Right? You have to come down for not supporting the Hong Kong protests. And the response to LeBron James, I think, was so telling because it really vindicated what we were talking about earlier about this debate that happened. This how Ma'Khia Bryant was seen as undeserving of life because she was guilty already of a crime for being in this very stressful situation, obviously, in her community. So the cop was right to kill her because the cop was the one who was threatened. And because LeBron James reacted the way he didn't acknowledge the procedural the procedure. He didn't acknowledge the fact that this system needs to be vindicated. And so he was piled on and he had to respond. I mean, if he didn't respond, there's like a bar in Cincinnati that won't play NBA games anymore. The whole media, even the most liberal media, which has been talking up until this point of, oh, we got to get justice and this is happening so much. Even they were like, LeBron, you're wrong on this one. You're going to have to learn a lesson. You're going to have to learn that not all of these killings are the same. And I think that is just indicative of this whole problem that we're facing and that we face for so long. I mean, this is part of neoliberalism. It's part of white supremacy. It's who's deserving and who isn't, right?
Mhm.
And oftentimes it's the poor Black communities. They're not deserving, but maybe, just maybe, the Black misleadership class is deserving. But sometimes they're not even deserving, even though they'll do whatever it takes to get what they think they deserve. But oftentimes, in LeBron James, one of the richest, Black Americans in the United States, and will, by the time he's, like, before he's 50, he's gonna, be a billionaire.
Yep.
Not even he is free of being disciplined for not doing what the system wants him to do, which
Yeah,
is
for
to.
making a very mild
That's
statement.
a very mild critique. You're next. Yeah, I mean, the cop just killed
I
a
hope.
16-year-old Black girl on camera. You would think that this would face consequences. So yeah, you're next, right? I mean, but for the, how, because of the because of this moment, right? There's this kind of boiling over, I think, of all of these contradictions and crises, that even something that small deserves this universal bipartisan condemnation. And I think that's just very interesting. But anyway, I
Yeah,
want to
it's
hear
like
your thoughts.
just like LeBron. Haven't you heard that justice has been done? So just be quiet already. And yeah, and Ma'Khia Bryant, I mean, the unworthy victim, a poor Black kid in a foster home with the knife, and it's like all these tropes rolled into one. And Black people, respectability politics. If we just behave a certain way, despite
Mhm.
all the evidence that this is not true, if we just behave in certain ways, we'll be safe. So she wasn't behaving in the way that she should have. The fact that the system failed her so terribly, nobody talks about that, and nobody even says these cops are not. Most countries don't. The cops aren't even armed. They don't even have guns. And the fact that I, well, I shouldn't say we, that so many people find it good and acceptable that we have this, this gang, this, slave patrol, these people who get to punish anybody and everybody for anything. And it tells you how Black people are seen, and how some Black people end up seeing themselves and being so indoctrinated that they cannot even stop and think about what they're saying when they say she deserved it, or it's not the same, or it wasn't so bad, or, well, the cop had to make a split second decision. Well, decide not to shoot somebody. I mean, if you can't think of anything else. But it's a very sad state of affairs. And LeBron James, I guess I wonder if how he felt about when he was asked about Tamir Rice, and he claimed he didn't know much about it. And, maybe he was embarrassed, and maybe he, decided to speak up this one time. But it was interesting to me that, and this is why people in positions like his can't be counted on, because they depend on good PR. They depend on being seen as in a positive light by most white people, by the media. And it's not. He didn't exactly apologize. He just deleted the tweet. Did he make a statement though? I didn't want to say anything until I heard.
Yeah, I think it wasn't a direct I think it was something like, I didn't mean it for it to be interpreted some way. I have to, I don't want to cause any kind of drama. This is about justice, something like that. It was something very light. He was definitely,
Mild.
he definitely did not want to be in the spotlight about it. And that's the interesting thing about Twitter, is that with someone of his stature, anything he says of any significance around these issues is going to be, in the spotlight. He knows that. But I think it's part of this process that you were talking about of, we can't depend on celebrities. And I think a lot of the movement, and that's part of this corporate capture, this attempt to capture the movement, on the part of corporations, nonprofits. They really want us to, rather than kind of seize on these moments where these celebrities feel like they need to respond, They want these celebrities to be the leaders. That's why I also believe that's part of the reason why there is such this universal condemnation of LeBron, because if he starts going off at the mouth, if he can't exercise impulse control like all other Black people are supposed to when they go through this every single day of their lives, then what kind of example is that going to set for the like I mean, there are people in the Black community, white, all people follow him almost religiously in some cases. So what is that message is that going to send to them? And I'm going to write a piece about this where I make the conclusion that like it's all about expectations. Like this system, this neoliberal, capitalist, racist system wants expectations to be the lowest as possible. You cannot expect anything. That's why we breathe a sigh of relief when Chauvin is convicted, because oh my gosh, like it happened. But we're not supposed, even if we want things, we're not even supposed to demand them. We're not even supposed to express something that should be common sense if you're a human being, which is a police officer killing someone on camera deserves some kind of consequences. So you can't even express that in however you want to express that, right? You have to think twice about it. And I think that's really the overall message of this. Similar in a lot of the China stuff was being brought up too. I mean, people all over from especially the far right were saying, oh, well, you weren't talking about human rights abuses in China when you had the opportunity to during the whole Hong Kong fiasco a couple of years ago. And that's another message, that you have to be angry at China. You have to follow the procedure of the criminal justice system, the procedure of U.S. foreign policy. You have to follow that. And if you do not, well, here's the discipline. And that is just a small, I think, to me, a very small reflection of what happens to people who really fight the system, like Mumia Abu-Jamal, Julian Assange. They receive the maximum amount of consequences, while people like LeBron James, with his status, even just his teeny tiny remark that of anger, of this kind of human moment, that has to be kind of
policed,
squashed, right?
It has to be policed. Yeah,
It has to be
opinion has
policed.
to be policed, and you're supposed to like who we tell you to like. You're supposed to hate who we tell you to hate. So keep up, LeBron. You're supposed to hate the Chinese government. Didn't anybody tell you? And everything said about China is bad. China is evil. And keep up. Follow the script. So yeah, it's so funny to me how Americans love to think of themselves as being free thinkers and independent minded, and people either don't care, or the fact that people bragged about when they were protesting Trump, if Hillary won, I could be at brunch. And I was like, they just told you who they are. And there they are now. So I don't care what Biden does. And people follow along, doing and thinking and saying what the system tells them. So yes, there are people who, their inclination is to support the system, to support the police. Well, he had to shoot her. He didn't have a choice but to shoot her 4 times, by the way. Um, that is that's just a lynching, and the fact that it was not universally condemned is very, very troubling, and it tells you the depth of confusion that there is in this country. But I'm hoping people remember what it's always true. Every victory is a people's victory. I kept telling people this is the people's verdict. I mean, thanking what's his name, the former Congress Keith Ellison in Minnesota. He did such a great job of prosecuting. Well, that's what they're supposed to do. And I'm not giving him extra praise because they did what they should do all the time. But that's where we are, where this movement last year, and that's something troubling to me, frankly, that it seems as though we didn't get very far as people, their political education and their level of knowledge is still quite low. And let's talk about something else. This focus on police killings, and there's no focus on any other kind of killing, no focus on mass incarceration. The police are then the prosecutors are feeders into the mass incarceration system. The violence that starts at the top with the state, as it whatever it does internationally. This year of COVID, where Black people died disproportionately because we have this, profit driven and, of course, racist healthcare system. All of the injustices are get too little attention. So the fact that we were supposed to be happy about Biden being elected, and he says, "Oh, nothing like after lying about I'll raise the minimum wage once I get into office." He's just a liar. And their minimum wage plan was to raise it to $15 an hour over a 5-year period, and they refused to do even that, hiding behind some nonsense about a Senate parliamentarian or something. And what else did they lie about? The stimulus, the measly $2,000. It's like, we meant 2,000 minus 600.
600.
It was like, come on. It's so those are all the injustices that we should be fighting against. And the fact that we have to see police snuff films to talk about injustice is it's just very sad. It's sad.
Yeah. Yeah. I know we're coming up on time soon, and I didn't even say this, but there are plenty of ways to support. Make sure you've already liked and subscribed to the channel. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. I didn't even say it once. No one, neither of us did.
I know. We were so eager.
It's fine. It's a quiet night, but we kept it on the politics. That's how it should be. But definitely, we support the channel, subscribe, like. And there are ways to support Black Agenda Report and us below in the description. But I know we're coming up on time, but your point on the fact that so much other state violence especially is not really on the table. I mean, I just think at the same time that this verdict was being deliberated and the decision, the conviction was being deliberated, and then the verdict was given, there's several people dying, and we're both here in New York, dying in the still open Rikers Island jail. And that happens all the time because solitary confinement is still regularly used, even though they have this kind of hybrid program now where some people are in solitary, some people are in a half solitary, not solitary, and some are in this more open kind of solitary. But solitary confinement is still being used regularly in Rikers Island jail, where people are not even convicted of anything. And they're committing outrageous rates of self-harm and suicide because solitary confinement is torture. And tens of thousands of people, most of them Black. I mean, I've been telling this to people and they don't believe it, but I say to them, did you know that Black people in solitary confinement they're overrepresented in solitary confinement more than they are even in the general prison population, which means this form of torture is even more so reserved for Black people than prison generally. And prison is known in the United States as a disproportionately Black experience. And prisons, the data shows it takes, if you are in prison for 1 year, you lose 2 years off of your life expectancy. So prison literally kills you. And I think that's not something that's talked about in this, even in the movement. I mean, I think it's a disservice that we do this, that the demands for justice for the families of police murders doesn't also include demands to massively scale back, if not totally eliminate, the mass incarceration system as a whole. But I'll just end it there. And Margaret, I don't know if you have any final thoughts. I know that
it's a funny thing when you talked about solitary confinement and the impact of incarceration. This past year, we've all been living with various degrees of quarantine and spending a lot of time in our homes. And everyone's talking about how anxious they are, depressed they are, how they don't like this existence, and nobody ever ties that to being imprisoned. So what must it be like And yes, I didn't like being, in my apartment for days at a time, by myself for some months. No socialization, not hanging out with friends or family. If you take COVID, took it seriously, but nobody extends that discussion. So, what must it be like if you're sick of being in your apartment all the time? What must it be like to be in a cell all the time? To be in solitary confinement all the time? So it's interesting to me how normalized that has become, and how accepting we are of being policed. So I have thought a lot about that. How we don't make that connection. Kids are anxious and people are suicidal. I was like, well, what must it be like to be in prison? And most people are in prison over BS. All kinds of things. I mean, people stopped because of air freshener that can lead to going to jail. So I hope that people expand their understanding of things, and that we make sure we are ready for the next time there's a mass movement. That we don't let scoundrels take over, Nancy Pelosi taking a knee, and Jamie Dimon of Chase Bank taking a knee, and some cops taking a knee, and let people get away with this and not learn lessons, so that we can be more effective in our activism, and in uplifting our knowledge, and diminishing this level of confusion that pervades so much of our country.
Yeah, we can leave it there. Thank you everyone for coming to this stream. I know it's been a while. Apologies. It's been a wild ride, March and April, I would say. But yeah, definitely continue to support the channel. Also, on the note of political prisoners, I see some things in the chat. Definitely for those who are on here, Ma'Khia Jamal, he is quite sick, just at baseline, but he just had emergency heart surgery.
Mhm.
You can find ways to support him at freemamia.com. I know a lot of folks were out in Philly. I believe it was last weekend.
Mhm.
So, definitely support him. Go to the Jericho movement. There are dozens and
That's
dozens of
right.
prisoners who need support. Write them a letter. Do whatever you can. And, continue to support what we do at Black Agenda Report. We will be back with you next month. And, and we'll make sure to get that out to you as soon as possible. But peace, everyone. And, appreciate spending this hour with you.
Thank you all. Peace out.